Welcome to the Pewsey Vale here in Wiltshire. My name is Paul Oakley and I run Pewsey Vale Studios where we teach oil painting courses. If you've been on one of my courses, you know I've long admired the paintings of Norfolk artist Edward Seago. The following painting is of Burrow Mump, a hill with the church on top in the Somerset Levels, and it is of a style similar to Seago. In the foreground of the painting is a lone tree by a drainage gate, similar to those Seago would have seen and painted in the Broads. The painting shows how quickly you can sketch a landscape to get an impression of the view, and how this can be achieved with limited details and bold blocks of colour. I hope you enjoy the demonstration. We're going to start the picture with a colour beginning, so we're going to get some blue down on the sky and some raw sienna down for the land, just to give us a beginning for the picture and to get the general setup and an arrangement of where the land and the sky are going to be. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of cerulean blue, and I'm going to mix this off the camera because I need to get quite a thin blend with my mineral spirit, just to get that into a wash that I can put across the sky. A little tiny bit of raw sienna, just to take the edge off that blue, and we're just going to pop that across the sky. Now you can see we've got this MDF board with a gesso on it, which is quite absorbent, so almost as soon as this paint's gone on, and this thin down paint's gone on, it's absorbing into the board, and that's going to be dry enough to paint in just a few moments. So just putting this on very roughly, taking the brush horizontally across, because that's where I'm going to paint the sky in a few minutes, but a lot of these marks are going to be covered up, so I'm just fairly loosely putting this on just across the top of the horizon there and around the tree that we're going to have in this foreground feature next to the dike going across the water, the land. So I'll just pop this on, and I'm just going to mix up some of the raw sienna now back into the blue that I've got to make more of a browny blue, and I'm just going to pop this on across, perhaps a bit more of the raw sienna in there. Pop this on for a first layer across the land. A bit more raw sienna, perhaps a little bit of the green, and again just some loose brush strokes, just to get a first layer of colour on below the sky. You can just see I've just sketched very roughly where I want the composition to sit, but I'm not following that particularly, other than just where I've gone around the tree with the sky. So I've got that in place. I'm just going to use a thinner brush now just to put in the tree, just a little bit of burnt umber and a little bit of green, just to give an idea of where that is. So just thin that down again. I'm just going to pop that on very loosely, really just to give myself an idea of where this is going to sit within the landscape. So that's my first layer of colour, starting point for the picture, and we're now going to move on to do the sky and get that painted in before moving on to the land. For the sky in my picture, I'm going to have generally a blue sky with maybe some white creamy clouds scudding across, but it's going to be a bright day with just a little bit of interest with some clouds, but not too much on this picture. So we're going to start off with putting the blue down. I'm going to be using some of my cerulean blue. I just want to take the edge off that with a bit of Naples yellow, so it's not quite so bright. And we're going to be popping this across fairly darkly across the top, so just a little tiny bit of white, and then we're going to lighten that up as we come down the picture. A bit more of the Naples yellow, no medium at this stage, so just popping the paint in, and we're just putting it across the beginning we've got. I'm quite happy for some of this blue that's down there already, just to show through a little bit. Taking the brush marks horizontally across the board, so get that colour across. Just popping that in, just with some fairly loose brush strokes. It's fairly dry, To say there's no medium at this stage, just mixing the colour as they go along so it's not all the same in the sky, and just a few bits of that colour beginning showing through here and there just to give some interest to the sky. Now we'll keep that going across. So we come down, we're going to get slightly lighter, not too light yet, but just a little bit more white in our mix. You can see I'm just using some fairly loose brush strokes to get this sky in to start with. I don't want it to look too smooth or too even in its colour. As we're coming down further, just using the same colours, a little bit more of the Naples yellow, a bit more of the white, and we're just lighting the sky up as it comes down. This is really going to be the background for a couple of clouds we're going to put on later, but I want it to look like a sort of quite a bright, maybe end of summer day. I'm going quite carefully around the tree, but where I'm next to it, I'm just going to overlap it slightly because I want to be able to paint the tree back into the sky. So we'll just go carefully around there. And I want the Burrow Mump, which is the focal point of the picture, although far in the distance, just to really stand out again to light a bit of the sky. So I'm just adding more white as I go down. So we've got more of a bluey white sky. Again, keeping the Naples yellow in there as well. I'm just going right across the top of where I've got this little hillock in the distance. And then I'm keeping it quite light as I go around the tree and just a little bit underneath so you can see a bit of sky underneath the tree. Just want to take the sky just a little bit down over the horizon so I can paint that horizon back into the sky and not have a gap left there. Yeah, fairly loosely done, but that's my sky, or the main blue area of the sky, pretty much finished. So just add a few more bits of interest into that. A bit more blue perhaps up here. And I think that's pretty much done with the sky. For this next stage of the picture, I've just put in some few pencil marks just to show some of the features that I'd lost with my initial colour washes. So just pop back in a little detail of the tree, the winch mechanism for raising up and down to let water in and out of the drainage ditches. We're going to have a drainage ditch running across the middle of the picture. We've got a few bushes there in the landscape. So I'm just going to put a few initial bits of colour down just to work out where my lights and darks are going to be, and just to get a general composition of the landscape. I'm going to start off with putting in this line of water going across. I've already got this sky colour, so just going to use a little bit of that, just darken that down a little bit, some of my sienna. I'm just going to pop a line of that in across. Perhaps that needs to be a little bit lighter. A little line of this in across the middle of the landscape. Just where the sky is reflecting on that ditch going across. Leaving it fairly loose at the moment. There we are. Now for this this foreground area, I want that to be quite dark underneath the tree. So I'm going to use a little bit of my sap green and a little bit of my French ultramarine. And just start to put a bit of colour in below here. Got this nice area of shadow and a bit of the land that's perhaps in the shade of some clouds in underneath the tree. It's just going to give us quite a strong foreground area So I'm just brushing that in fairly roughly at the moment. Different brush strokes, maybe a bit of burnt umber as well, just to really darken that down. And then take that across just with some loose brush strokes. Some of these are going to be covered up, and some of these will be part of the initial, the finished picture. So we'll just pop those in fairly loosely. Well, I've got this sap green mixture. I'm just going to put a first layer of colour on the tree as well. So I'm just going to take that down with some vertical brush strokes. Bit of sap green, just darken down with the burnt umber. I want this to stand out quite strongly against the blue sky behind it. So if there's a bit of shadow coming over it. So yeah, just add a little bit of French ultramarine as well, just to make it slightly darker. And then we'll just put the trunk of the tree in the same colours. Quite roughly at the moment, not too much detail. And just blending a little bit with the sky beyond it. And we come back to that and finish it off later on. So we've got that in, a nice layer of darker colour in the foreground. I also want a bit of some areas of lights and darks going back into the picture, so we get a real sense of distance as we're looking towards Burrow Mump. So I'm just going to use this colour I've got, maybe just with a little touch of white, just to create an area where it looks like perhaps some shadow of a cloud falling across the distant horizon. And that's really going to help pick out that river in the distance, or the drainage ditch in the distance. So we're just going to pop that layer of darker colour in across the landscape. Got a couple of little trees in there, so we're just going to leave those at the moment. I'll just perhaps follow that on over here. I want some nice light colour in behind where we've got this winch and a little bit of fencing, so they really stand out. So I'm going to think about some lighter colours in now to fit in amongst those dark colours. I'm just going to start to introduce some lighter greens across my landscape to get that real sense of depth with some darks and lights. So I'm going to put down a bit of green in the foreground. I'm going to use my some cerulean blue and mix that with a bit of Naples yellow just to make a nice light bluey green. Just as a starting point. Just going to pop this down in this area here. We'll probably go lighter still with this, but I just want to get an idea of how the picture's going to work. Again, some quite loose brush strokes. Maybe add a little bit of my cad yellow as well, just to give a bit of variety in how that sits across the picture, particularly as it comes a bit further towards me. So a bit more of the cadmium yellow in there. And a slightly different green. Just taking that into the darker area where it's more in shadow that we've already got. I'm going to use some more of this to go back. Maybe a little touch of white with that as well, just to give some idea of where we're going to have some lighter patches here in behind the tree. So these fence details against the tree really stand out. Just really at this stage, just really getting a feel for how my picture's going to work in terms of depth running backwards. In this area that's a bit further forward, I'm going to have a bit more of a browny raw sienna feel, as if it's end of year and some of the grass has died back. So just going to start to put a layer of colour down here, a bit of raw sienna. Keeping that a bit darker as we come forward. So quite quickly starting to get a bit of a framework for the picture, just in terms of colour and the feel for depth going back into the picture. a bit more of this down here. This stage is really about bands of colour, so bands of light and dark, getting a real feel of depth looking across those Somerset levels. So as we go further back, we're going to introduce a bit more blue, so we've got that aerial perspective, getting an idea of the landscape getting slightly more blue in shade as we go further back. So I'm just going to start with a bit of ultramarine and mix that into some of my previous colours. I've got a bit of raw sienna there, and we're just going to pop a bit of that going across in sort of middle distance. To see how that's really making that water we've got put in stand out a bit. Put it in behind the tree. For the far horizon, I'm going to mix up quite a warm, slightly reddy blue, just to give an idea of distance, and also to paint in the little hill at Burrow Bridge, so Burrow Mump. But I don't want to do that in too much detail, so I want that to be some quite distinct brush strokes, but leave the detail for the closer part of the picture. So we're going to start off with a bit of cerulean blue, a little bit of alizarin with that, a little touch of white, a bit more of the red perhaps, and I want some fairly sort of rough brush strokes, not really looking to define anything too much at this stage, just popping in the hill there, put a bit of ultramarine in there just to make a difference to the shading, but it really is quite a loose line going across the horizon. Pop in the little tower, little church that's there, but no more detail than that at this stage. I can come back to that and fiddle about with it later, but I want it to be quite a loose part of the landscape. So I might just add a little bit more white to that mix, just so it's not a singular colour going across, but I really don't want to lose those loose brush strokes that run across at the moment. So looking at that, I think I might want to just lighten up the sky a bit behind that. So we've got that sky colour we had previously. So I'm just going to put a bit more white with that. I can really sort of start to define that edge of the landscape with the sky going up across it. And where some of those brush strokes have made it look like it's perhaps rising up, just pull those in with a bit more sky going in. Also help me define the little church on the map there. Start to give a bit more interest to the sky. You can see where that gesso board's really soaked up the paint, so the sort of fairly dry brush approach, I can start to put a bit more paint on the sky already, and it's not blending too much with the colours I've got underneath. So just to start work my way back to from back to front again, I'm just going to pop in, we've got a couple of little trees there, so I'm going to pop in those in, again quite a dark colour, so I'm going to use a bit of ultramarine with a bit of the burnt umber we had before. I want to be able to go in with those with some lighter colour over the top, but just to get them established, I'm going to pop them in fairly loosely, just with a small flat brush, and a few other perhaps bits of trees and bushes running across there. And I've got this dark colour, where are we down here? Just going to start to introduce a few more lines, almost like shadows falling across the landscape, just to give an idea of depth and make it feel like it's got a few miles as it's heading away from us. maybe with a bit more raw sienna as we come closer, just to give a bit of a difference in shade. Again, when I've got those different colours, just really starting to add some detail into this foreground area. I've got the basics of the picture down. I've just used my graphite pencil just to give an idea of where I want some additional bands of colour to really start to bring the picture to life. It's all there at the moment, but obviously it needs some more to finish it off and make it look a bit more interesting than it does at the moment. So one of the things I want to do is to start to add a little bit more of this, an idea of this drainage ditch going across, reflecting the blue sky above it. I've got a start to it, but I just want to take that across a bit more, quite brightly, so it looks like the sun's falling on it. It just heads towards the hill in the distance, just really leading the eye in. So I don't want that to be a consistently bright colour. So there's areas where it's going to be a darker blue, and areas where it's lighter. But I just want to start to bring that in, just in towards where the drainage mechanism is sitting on this little hump of land in the foreground. So something like this. And there we are. And we can come back to that later on, but we'll get that in like that. Now we've got that far distance quite well in. I'm just going to add a few bits of maybe slightly darker blue into that, just to give a bit of additional detail to that depth. So that's a little bit of burnt umber and a little bit of alizarin. No detail at all really, and just perhaps define this little hillock a bit better with the church on top. We finish that off. That's almost there, I think. Might come back to that towards the end, and just where it's in behind this tree. We're just going to blend that in a little bit so it's not such a distinct line, because we're looking at quite a flat landscape. And we've got some quite dark areas in behind the tree, and what I want to do is introduce some areas where we've got a bit of light as well. So bits of perhaps bits of field or bits of landscape where the light's catching. So I'm going to use a bit of a cerulean green, a little bit of our cad yellow here to get a brighter green, maybe just a little touch of white. I just want to put a few little areas where perhaps the sun's catching. Again, not too much detail. Just to give an idea of light falling in different bits of the landscape, and that's really going to help draw the eye back into the picture. Might do that as well with a bit of white and raw sienna. Bit on that far edge of the drainage ditch. Maybe just a line running in across here. Again, no real detail at this stage. Just want to get an idea of the light falling on different parts of the landscape in different ways. Just a really good way to introduce some depth to your picture. And I might just introduce some of this darker area as well, so that's a bit of burnt umber and a bit of ultramarine. Or just like a bit of shadow falling across the land. Just putting that in different areas just to get a feel for where that shadow is falling. I'm going to continue with the theme of introducing some bands of colour across the landscape, just to really give that feel of depth when you're looking across it, so it feels like you're looking right across the Somerset levels. So in order to do that, I'm going to mix up some brighter colours and put them on quite thickly, areas of impasto, just sparingly to work with the darker areas. So we've got this idea of light and shade, of maybe clouds going across the sun to create these lighter and darker areas in the picture. So in order to do so, I'm going to mix up a mix of colours. Probably start with some raw sienna, a little bit of titanium white, almost like a field that's gone dry at the end of the summer, maybe a little touch of green in there. We're going to put this on quite thickly, but in some quite distinct areas. So I'm going to put a bit in front of this darker area where we've got the hillside of Burrow Mump, and just quite a thin brush. It's quite a small picture, and just to start to put a few bits of lighter areas of landscape in here, just like the sunlight's falling through and hitting them, and that just really helps to draw your eye towards the hill on the horizon. Maybe just change that colour as you go along, so perhaps a bit more raw sienna, so it's not quite so bright, and just dragging that along, dotting it in below the hills there. So it's not consistently across, and I might just pop a little bit of that in behind these trees, because that's going to really help pick them out a bit, make them stand out a bit more against a slightly lighter background. But I want to be fairly sparing with that, so it doesn't look too much in the picture. I'm going to put a bit more over here as well, so maybe a bit more of a greeny colour. Got a bit of green there, so we're going to put a bit of a band of colour in, again underneath the hills, quite thickly. Remembering we've got that trunk of the tree there, but not covering up all that nice dark area we've got on there already. So already, hopefully, we're starting to feel a bit like the landscape's got some depth to it. I'll just smooth that line out a bit, so continue a line across there. We've got the line of the river, the dike. We've got the bits of light on the horizon coming in, and we can just put some quite thick impasto paint in places, but not consistently across, because we don't want a sort of uniform lights and darks in the picture. And I'm just going to continue that theme, bringing it forward. So I'm going to put a little bit of darker area in here, just to really emphasise that. So that's a bit of my burnt umber, a bit of ultramarine, and then just maybe perhaps a bit darker, just to really help emphasise the drainage dike going across there, drainage ditch. And we might risk putting some cows in there later on, so a nice dark background to put them against. And the same in this area behind the tree, just in patches a bit darker, so burnt umber, a bit of French ultramarine. And if you put that against the areas of light, it really helps them stand out a bit. Maybe just push back into them a bit if you like, so you haven't got that consistent line going across. And then we're going to start to look at these areas a bit closer. I want quite a light area behind the tree, because that's going to be an area where we can see the fence and the winching mechanism highlighted against a lighter area of landscape. So I'm going to use similar colours, a bit more of my raw sienna, maybe a little touch of cad yellow, and some bit of white. Just create quite a thick, creamy paint, and I'm going to put that on quite thickly as well. So I want that to really stand out. Just dragging it across, so thicker in places than others. Maybe a bit more of my sienna in there, raw sienna. And we can just pop that in. And again, that's really going to help the trunk of the tree stand out, so just avoid that. And when we put in the bits of mechanism and winch mechanism and fencing next to it, that's going to really help that pop out. Let's pop a little bit in there just to follow the line of the water. And we're going to do the same down for this field here. Bit more of the green. More my sap green, a bit more white. And again, we're going to put this on fairly loosely and across that sort of still slightly wet green we've got underneath. And that's really going to hopefully, again, look like the sun's just catching on that bit of the field. Maybe just push that back into the dark area a bit. And we're going to start to bring this round so that it comes round to the front of the little hump that the tree is standing on. Just some fairly loose brush strokes. And then I might just pop a bit on, find a bit that's slightly more creamy, and just an area across there just to show the field slightly separate from the area in front of it. But again, not losing all that nice colour we've got underneath. So I hope you see there's a bit more depth to the landscape coming forward. While I look at it, I think it's going to need another layer, but I'm going to have a little look at the far horizon now. We've got some bits of colour, but as I look at it now with the some of the landscape moving forward, I think some bits of lighter blue would probably help a bit. So I'm going to go back in with my cerulean blue, and again a touch of raw sienna. I'm just going to introduce a few bits that are lighter on this far landscape, just to again give an idea of the lights hitting it, almost blending in with the sky there. So again, it's not quite such a uniform colour across. Got these pencil marks we put in earlier, so we'll just maybe lose a few of those and use that colour just to mould that hill a bit. I've got this brightness, might just again put a bit of light back into just patches of this drainage ditch going across. Really help that stand out within this drainage landscape. This stage of the painting, I'm going to start to think a bit more about the sky. I want some interesting clouds sort of scudding across. I'm going to do that in a couple of layers. So I'm going to start off with some white and just introduce a little bit of my raw sienna to that. This is sort of a cloud that's going to sit underneath the main cloud. So it's sort of a creamy colour. And I'm going to have some clouds sort of moving across from left to right. And I'm just going to put this in really, really quite loosely. Just dragging the paint across, just to give an idea of a cloud that's moving across, and that's going to sit underneath the white clouds that I put on in a few minutes. So just to get an idea of some movement across the sky, but without worrying too much about it. So if you're taking more than about a minute to put this on, you're probably taking too long. You just really want to put this on very, very loosely at this stage. Just an idea of some clouds there, maybe just spilling across over here, and as I say, we're going to put some more definition on that, some whiter clouds on in a few minutes, but I just want to get a start on where my clouds are going to sit within the picture. Next up, I'm going to look to introduce a bit more green into my landscape. It's gone a little bit yellow for me, so using a bit of my sap green. Maybe just a little touch of white. Again, just to get a sort of an end of summer green. Just going to start to introduce this into a few areas. Again, just thinking about bands of colour. So it's going to be quite effective where I've got some dark areas behind it. Just to start to put them on. I don't want the painting to get too messy at this stage, but just to get an idea of some different lines of colour going across. Where's my colour gone? And then over here as well, perhaps reintroduce a bit more of this green. The more we layer these colours one on top of each other, starting with that initial colour wash, we're just going to get a really nice depth of colour, and this sort of feels like some longer grass, maybe with the wind blowing through it. And we can just, without losing the brush strokes we've got underneath, we can just start to put that back in. This area here to me feels a little bit too dark, so I'm just going to have a think about how that could be changed. Maybe we're just going to, I think it was burnt umber to start with, and we just mix that with a little bit of French ultramarine, tiny touch of white maybe, and we're just going to maybe start to see if we can soften that colour a little bit. Still want it to look like an area that's in shadow, but perhaps not as dark. So we've just got that slightly softer colour going in. Yeah, I'm not going to lose all of that dark patch, but just introduce a bit of colour. Idea of some shadows coming across from a sun going kind of behind a cloud, perhaps. Just blend that in a little bit so it's not quite such a stark line. That's a bit better. I might use some of that colour over here as well. But I don't want to lose this definition of colours going across the landscape. Right, just going to start to have a little look at this tree and how this is going to work. I quite like the dark silhouette of the tree against the sky, so I'm not going to lose that entirely, but I want that sort of perhaps an autumnal colour in the leaves. So go for a bit of raw sienna, a little bit of my sap green. That's a little touch of yellow. We're just going to see how that works, just as if the light's just catching the top of the tree. And I'm going to put that on fairly loosely, just with some nice vertical brush strokes like we had to start with. Lost my colour now. Just as if the light's just starting to fall on top of that tree, and then perhaps we'll find something just a little bit lighter as well. Perhaps a little bit of white with that, just to give a little highlight maybe. But again, I don't want this tree to stand out, other than as a silhouette mainly. So we're just going to put a few leaves on top of there, and I'm going to darken down the area underneath it as well. I guess it's something like a hawthorn tree or something like that that's just sat within the landscape. And then just to darken it underneath, going to go with my ultramarine and burnt umber, maybe a little tiny bit of alizarin as well. And we're just going to pop that in underneath where we've put some of these leaves in. The tree just hanging down. Just using some loose brush strokes just to give an idea of the texture of the tree. And we're going to put the tree trunk in as well with that sort of fairly dark colour. And what I've got there, I'm just going to reintroduce a bit of this shadow area underneath. So I want this to be quite a dark area. Not across all of it, just mainly sort of shadow, and then just an area around that tree just to give an idea of this foreground being a bit more in shade than further down into the painting. I've got this tree and I'm not quite happy with the area of light I've got behind it. I want that to be a bit brighter, I think, again, so that the fence is going to stand out against it. So let's see, we've got a bit of raw sienna and a bit of yellow there. Just going to see if we can really get that to pop out. So there we are, a bit of a brighter, thicker bit of colour. Try and take that right up to where the tree's sitting. And again on this side as well, so I can just take that away. Maybe just follow that around the edge of the drainage ditch a bit. Just a real big splash of colour, just in that one place, brighter than anything else on the picture, just behind the tree. That's really going to help the ditch and the fence and the winching mechanism stand out when we paint them in. I might just go a bit lighter on the top of the tree there. I'm quite sure about its shape at the moment, so just going to have a little work on that. So again, some raw sienna, a little bit of my sap green. Just going to give that a bit more shape, like a rough old tree that's not quite so neatly shaped as it was at the moment. Okay, the last thing I'm going to do at this stage is just to introduce a few bits of thicker impasto colour, impasto paint, just right around the base of this area. So I wanted it to look like some rough grass that's really in the foreground of this picture. So I'm taking some raw sienna again, some quite thick, making it quite thick with white paint, maybe a little bit of my sap green, and I'm just going to use quite a thick brush just to make some marks that look like some grass that's perhaps just growing up and next to this mound. Perhaps it hasn't been cultivated because it's right underneath this tree and difficult to get to. So just some quite light bits of paint, some quite thick bits of paint, just to give some interest to this part of the picture. Just mixing different colours up as I go along, so a bit more raw sienna there. And then perhaps just blending that back into this part of the picture. So we're getting there with the picture. Now's the time to have a look at it, evaluate it, and see what else we need to do to get it finished off. Now I've reached the stage where I need to think about what needs to be done to finish the painting off. So looking at my picture, it needs a bit more in the sky, some more clouds. I think the horizon needs to be lightened a bit as well, so that the hillock, the Burrow Mump, stands out a bit more. We need a bit more work around the tree, perhaps a bit more colour within the foreground, and some of these trees picked out a bit better, and perhaps some in next to this drainage ditch as well. So let's start with this far horizon, the sky. We've got obviously a sort of quite a light sky, but I want to lighten up a bit around the horizon. So I'm going to go in with a bit of white into my original sky mix, so a little bit of cerulean blue, a bit more white with that, quite a light colour. I'm just going to start to pop this in just along the horizon. Now I've just penciled in a bit more detail the shape of the Burrow Mump, just to help me a bit, just to make sure I get that right, because obviously that's a fairly important bit of the landscape. So just pop that in. I want that to stand out against a fairly light background. So I'm just putting this lighter colour in. And just adding a little bit more of the cerulean, just to blend that in a bit with the sort of wispy sky that we've got going on. Take these clouds across the picture. But again, not spending too long on this. I want it to be fairly distinct brush strokes. Now we've got these slightly pinky browny clouds higher up, so I want to introduce a bit more impasto paint to these, just to give an idea of them being sort of fairly thick clouds. So I'll find a bit of white up here. And just a little touch of the raw cerulean, raw sienna even. I'm just going to start to introduce a few thicker bits of cloud onto my picture, and again some quite thick brush strokes, just dragging the brush across, introducing some clouds. and almost no more than that. I just want them to look like some wispy clouds going across the sky. So you can see now by putting this this initial layer of slightly more cream coloured clouds to start with, we get a feeling of depth within our sky. So I don't think I want to do too much more than that. Maybe just a bit of cloud going across slightly thicker here, a bit closer towards the horizon. This nice little orangey bit there I'm going to leave. I quite like that. And that's what I'm going to do for my sky. I want it a nice simple sky, just to look like a day with the clouds scudding across and creating the shadows that we've got in the landscape. So I'm going to leave my sky at that. Next I'm going to have a look at this area around here. So we've got this area of shadow and light. I'm going to introduce a bit more green to this area here. So I'm going to mix that up. So a bit of my yellow, my cad yellow, and a little bit of cerulean blue and a little bit of white. I'm just going to put a bit more light into this area here. Again, I don't want it to cover up everything we've got already. Just going to push that back into that area of shadow so it doesn't look quite so distinct as it does at the moment, and take it on down to the side of the drainage ditch. Again, just some fairly thick paint, and as it sort of drags off the brush, letting it do so it's not a distinctive line. We can just pop a few bits more in here, just building up these layers of colour. And when I've got these colours, again, you just start to use them where we've got this bit of wispy grass in the foreground. Add a bit more in there if you want to. I'm just going to have a look at these. I've got some trees here. I want a couple more bushes a bit further on, so just breaking up that continual line of the drainage ditch. So I'm just going to use a bit of ultramarine, a bit of my burnt umber, and a little bit of white. I'm just going to pop just an idea of some bushes in over here. So you don't really have too much there. Just an idea of that ditch being broken up by something within the landscape. So quite an impressionist landscape really. I don't want anything too detailed, and I think we're sort of there with that at the moment. These trees here, they're quite dark at the moment. I want them to have a little bit of a sort of end of summer tinge to them. So we've got our sap green and a little bit of our raw sienna. Just going to put a bit of colour on those, perhaps slightly lighter, maybe a bit more. I'll go with a bit of our yellow. And just sort of mould them around a bit. I don't want them to stand out too much. Perhaps a bit more than that, so let's just add a little bit of white to that. I actually preferred them a bit darker, so we'll go back in with our, they stand out a bit more if they're darker, I think, so we'll go back in with our burnt umber and ultramarine, and just leaving some of that green on there, and an idea of some other trees really going along this area of the edge of this bit of field here. Maybe looking a bit too even at the moment, so we'll just have a little go at those again. Put a bit of shape back into them as they were. Right, now underneath the tree I've just drawn in a pencil an idea of where I want this winch mechanism to be, and we've got a fence as well. So I'm just going to put that in, get on some quite dark colour, and some quite thick paint to get that in over the paint beyond it. So going in again with my burnt umber and also a bit of the ultramarine, and I want to show these not in any detail but just an idea of where they are. You could leave your paint until it's dried to get these in if you wanted. And then we've got this fence going in here. Really silhouetted against that nice big bold bit of colour we've got in behind. Leave it like that. I might just use a bit of that bright colour from behind just to thin those posts down a bit. Maybe a little bit across the top as well. Just this last little bit here. Never wasting a bit of colour if you've got it, pop them back in. And as we've got this colour, I might just introduce a little bit down here again, just to give this idea of the late summer grass. Not happy with these trees and bushes here, and I think what it needs is something just to pick them out a little bit. So I'm going to go with a sort of not a bright colour, but maybe a bit of a browny colour. So a bit of my raw sienna, and just put a bit of a line of colour going in behind them. So just lightening up some of that shadow area. Just so you can see there's a line of trees going in there. Right, I think the last thing I want to do is just have a little look at this area of the tree. Maybe the tree needs a little bit more work, and also the mound that it's sitting on. Just looking at this tree, just to finish that off, I want to have a bit more light and movement at the top of the tree. So I'm mixing a bit of raw sienna, a bit of my sap green and a bit of white. Nice sort of end of summer, slightly autumnal type colours. I'm just going to give an idea of some of these branches, some of the leaves in the light from the left hand side. Giving a bit of an idea of movement in this tree, and then just perhaps follow that across with some quite big bold brush strokes. Maybe a bit more green in there. quite loose movement, just to give an idea of this slightly windy day at the end of summer with the tree moving around. So I think I'm going to leave that like that. So all I need to do now is just look at finishing off this little mound that the tree sat on. I like the darkness of the mound at the moment, and I think we've got the sort of shadow of the tree coming down. It's obviously a wider area that's perhaps covered by some shadow from the clouds. So we're going to just introduce a bit more colour to that. So I'm going to use a bit of my sap green, a little bit of my cerulean blue, and just start to, I don't want anything that's going to stand out too much. Just blending that down into the colour we've got already around it, so it's not quite such a stark contrast. Little bits of colour getting picked up with that, with the still slightly wet paint around it, so we can just blend that in a bit. Again, some really quite loose brush strokes in around the tree. I can maybe just take some of those out into the field as well, just to break it up a bit. And as we come under the tree, I'm just going to introduce a bit of French ultramarine to my green, just to darken that down a bit, so that's much more of an area in shade. And again, just pull some of that down into the lines we've got there already. Maybe just defining the top of this hill a bit. I just want some really quite thick impasto paint, just to create this idea that we've got in the foreground. Some really nice close interest. Some of this dry grass brushing up against this mound. So we're going to use some of our nice raw sienna we've been using all the way through. Quite thick brush strokes, a bit blending into the colours we've got already. Don't want to mix them up too much. You want to get an idea of this movement, and if you blend your colours too much, that's going to get lost. So we're just going to be using this mixture of raw sienna and the green, a bit more white, a bit of that, and then just some quite thick marks, just to draw the eye in to this part of the picture. Just picking out that area of shadow a bit more. Some quite thick brush strokes. Get the paint on almost as thick as you can at this stage. Go back in with some lines there, I think. And maybe just darken down this far corner. So I might just go even lighter there for a moment, just to really draw the eye in to this part of the picture. Right, last couple of things I think I want to do. Just looking, I think I want to be a little bit more light behind these trees. And as promised, I might have a little go at some cows in a minute. So just some, there we are, that's probably a bit better. Just a bit of raw sienna and white. So perhaps a field that's already been turned over a bit. Just gives a bit of a better idea of some trees and bushes on the edge of this field. But without losing that nice area of darkness that we had in, area of shadow we've got there already. I quite like a bit of that, just maybe coming in here, just to break up this area a little bit. So we've got a fairly loose impressionist picture there. Might just use a slightly thinner brush perhaps just to give some other marks down here. But I don't want to do too much of that. Can almost just make some of the back of the brush as well, some idea of this grass coming forward, but again, don't be too tempted to do too much. Maybe take a couple of those out again, I think. Might just pop a bit of this colour over here just to break that big light patch up a bit. Must look like it's going up onto the land beyond. Right, let's give a couple of cows a go. We're going to put them far away, so what we're going to do is just put a few little dots of just off-white on. Now we're going to put them over here somewhere. And the cows are generally square. And then if they're going to be, we're going to need some dark bits as well with them. Where they're brown and white. The trick is really just not to think of them as cows, think of them as some marks. And there they are. Right, so that's my fairly simple, hopefully, Somerset Levels landscape in the style of Edward Seago, or that sort of style, a fairly loose impressionist style. And I hope you enjoyed the painting. The last little bit I want to do is I'm just not quite sure about this area at the front, so I'm just going to go back in with a bit more of a greeny colour. It's just looking a bit too pale at the moment. Just to really pick out this area, this shaded area underneath the tree. So just putting a bit of this is green and a bit of raw sienna, so sap green, a bit of raw sienna, a bit of white in over the top of some of these lighter areas we put in already. And I think that just works a little bit better. It's not quite such a stark contrast in colour. Maybe just a little bit of lighter colour across here. always possible just to keep on adding some layers of paint until you're happy, but be careful not to overwork it. Just go back in and get that line a bit. There we are. So there we are. That's my simple English impressionist landscape of Burrow Mump and the Somerset Levels. I hope you enjoy the demonstration.